welcome to another episode of the Tell Not Show. As always, we are your hosts. We have the wonderful Kirsha Fox, author of Son of Deception and the newly released The White Leaf Child. Um, she is a homeschooling mom of four, avid gamer, and reader.
And my lovely co-host is Julia J.K. Allen, author, editor, and author coach. She is a fantasy and horror author, and she likes to sprinkle magic on everything.
Yes, and we're very excited to be here tonight. Our guest tonight is Claudia Blood.
Yes, Claudia Blood's love of epic fantasies led her from a life as a research scientist right into that of an award-winning author, with such works as the Relic Trilogy, Merge Series, and the Supernatural Detective Agency. Claudia Blood's works cover a wide range of genres and themes that have captivated many, and we're very excited to meet her tonight.
Yes, welcome to the show.
Hello, how are you?
I'm well, thank you for asking. It seems like a big jump from research scientist into author, so we would love to hear about your writing journey and kind of how that got started and what it's been like so far.
Yeah, so I think I started off like a lot of other authors where they did it as a young child. So the first thing that I wrote was with my little sister, and I had her write it out on the yellow notepad when I was in the third grade, a D&D romance. But life kind of got in the way, and you have to support yourself, and back then it was just what you had to do. So I got a biology degree and became a research associate, a scientist at a cardiovascular research center, and then I went into IT, so I became a Java developer. And after that, like after things settled, it was like this need that was there in the background, if you know what I mean. It was something that I always wanted to do, but it never made it above the fold of a day. Like there's only so many hours in a day, and the priority was not high enough for it to happen. And so I hit a milestone birthday, and I decided I needed to make it happen. I either was going to stop saying I was a writer, or I was actually going to do it and be a writer and get stuff done and publish it. And so I did. And rusty as all heck at this point. So I decided to hire an editor and basically a friend that we went back and forth and got in the habit of writing, made it a priority each day, set myself up deadlines, got stuff done, and finally finished my first book. And it was kind of went from there.
Okay.
Very nice.
Yeah.
I think that, a lot of us as creatives have kind of that voice in the back of our heads. It's like we need to create, and it's really a big driving force for us.
Yep, definitely.
So what does your process look like from getting your ideas to a completed manuscript?
I'm a chaotic mess. I am what's called a pantser, or sometimes I say it's a flashlight method. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that method, but it's basically you have a flashlight in the dark and you kind of know where you're going and you're looking for the next milestone in the dark, and you keep heading just a little bit away. So what I do is I dream, or I have ideas just go in my head, and I cycle through different ideas. And when one finally makes the cut that I'm super interested in it, then I start really brainstorming about okay, well, what does it mean and how did they get there? And for example, on the Relic Trilogy, that came from a dream that I had that was set in a jungle that ended up in alien technology, and an 80s aerobics instructor came in. And so I had a how the heck did that happen moment, and it kept me interested enough to go through the process of writing. Wait, what was I doing? Oh yeah, writing, right? And then redoing the idea until it finally all kind of worked together. And then you got to the end and sent it to an editor where they go, yeah, you forgot this plot hole and that plot hole, and
right.
Yep. And then after a number of different editing, there you go. It's done, or as done as you can make it at that point. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. There's definitely a point where you're adding one too many brush strokes to the painting when it comes to editing.
It's done enough.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's funny too, when you don't know in the beginning, you might go with different editors and they give you conflicting advice. And it's always very hard as a new writer to try and figure out well, who's got the right advice? I want the best advice. Well, what the heck does that mean? Right. So that was something that I had to work my way through, where I was like, well, wait, no, that editor's not giving me advice that makes sense. I'm going to go over here.
Mhm.
and then kept that
Yeah,
going.
and it's important as an editor myself. It's important that it's a conversation between like why I'm making this suggestion and why you want to keep it the way you have it, and kind of coming in the middle because there's certain things like when I wrote my first novel, I had it edited by someone and they were like, "I see what you're trying to do with the ending. Scrap the ending. It's not working. It's not quite the aha you think it is." And then
Yep.
when I went to go get it published, they were like, "This ending's not working." Like, and I was like, "Well, I had this original ending," and they were like, "Yes, that is the ending that you is
Right.
right for your story."
Right.
And so I just wasn't able to trust myself enough as a new author to be like, "No, this for my story, this is the right ending."
This is the right.
Um, but as an editor, I see like where you want to say like, "Well, my experience is why I'm making this suggestion. But of course, it's at the end of the day, it's always their story, not
Right.
mine. And
Right.
it's not my story to tell, and it's not my ending to choose. So,
Right.
I just, yeah, I can relate.
And
Yeah,
it's hard too when you're new, like you don't know what you don't know. So am I making bad
right,
choices because I'm ignorant, or am I making like getting bad advice because they have a different direction in mind than what I think should happen? And
right,
so it's a
right.
Absolutely. You
Yeah,
have
yeah,
to
it
find the
is.
editor whose advice and the way that they handle things resonates with you.
exactly.
Yeah,
As
And
a
it's a
yeah.
growing process.
as
Yeah.
a baby author myself, I think I sent sample edits to, oh,
Hmm.
geez, like at least a dozen different editors
Mhm.
looking for the one that like loved the most that fit. We were the best fit.
Right.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
so true. And that might change over time too. That's the other thing that, when you're like, oh, like the advice doesn't feel as good, or you're not catching things, and I really want to push myself and be a better writer. What
Hmm.
do I do now? And
Mhm.
Right.
sometimes, yeah,
Right.
you have to find someone else. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, when we were discussing different topics for the show, one of the things you talked about as like a strong point of yours or strength of yours as a writer is originality. So, what to you makes a story original?
So it was funny. I had an answer that I was going to say for this, and about how it's different things in different places and that kind of jazz. But I had this like recollection when I was younger in the middle school. I took a creative writing class, right, and I was all excited I could be creative, and the writer or the teacher actually said I was too creative. Like
Hmm.
I was too much. And of course I was hurt because I was a kid and whatever else. But it occurred to me later that, and how this segues into the question on originality is you need to be original enough, but still approachable. Because if
Hmm.
people can't get into your work, then it doesn't matter how original it is. So you can have like one of the things that we were just talking about as a writers group, like talking about tropes and talking about different ways of putting together. Like there's a way you can be original. You plug in different pieces into the different trope, and you come up with something that's different, and you put your own spin on it. And
Hmm.
putting a 1980s aerobics instructor on an alien planet with alien technology in the far future, like. I've never seen that anywhere before. Like that's not something that
Hmm.
people are like, yeah, that's the thing that people should do when you write. So I think it's taking common elements, switching them out for something that's different that you don't find in that context, and
Hmm.
then playing with the idea and see how you can merge it into something that's new and different, but still be
But also,
approachable.
but also familiar enough that we can, as a reader, relate
Right.
to it. Hmm.
Yeah, because you can go too far.
Absolutely. I love that because it's like it's true that you don't want to just be out in left field completely.
Mhm.
Where it's just like, where is this coming from? How does this make sense to the story? Or how does this make sense in general?
Yeah,
And that's where we find tropes comforting and familiar
Mhm.
and something that we're
absolutely.
going back to read the genre of book for a reason because we love those
Mhm.
tropes and we love those characters.
We need something
Uh,
relatable as readers, something to latch
Yes,
onto with the story. If we don't find it relatable pretty quickly, it's just shut the
you're
book
done.
down.
yeah,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. So, I have a question. When it comes to that, then, um, how do you work with the tropes? Like, can you give an example of working with a trope but keeping it original and fun?
Okay, I don't write romance. I totally
Mhm.
wanted to be a romance author, but I cannot do the beats to save my life, but I love romances. And so, one of the favorite tropes is, an enemies to lovers is
Yeah,
one of the
yeah.
tropes inside of there, right? But the thing with the trope, it doesn't tell you who the participants are. It doesn't tell you what their issue, their internal issue is. It doesn't tell you where they live or their occupation, right? It doesn't tell you how they overcome any of their difficulties. All it tells you is you have a set of enemies in the beginning and they become lovers by the end of the book. So if I had my dragon who is a gardener who lives in a small town in Minnesota, who is, enemies with the guy next door. There's an auto mechanic who's a zombie who's, hates fire or whatever, right? And thinks that the dragon is going to burn him down and, doesn't want to die, right? Like that's, again, like, I don't think I've seen that either, but it would be kind of interesting, right?
Right.
But it's still the trope. If you put them together as enemies in the beginning, no matter what their background or no matter who they are, and then by the end of the story, you've got that buildup that goes to the end where they are lovers, you've used the trope and you've used it successfully.
What tips do you have in general for writing original stories, perhaps for a newer author?
Again, sort of the grounding in a story. I have an example of this. So the first book that I ever completed, I struggled with, and I decided I was going to take an end-to-end story and just write a paranormal suspense or whatever, right? And have no supernatural, just a suspense, no supernatural elements, no nothing extra inside of there. Just do it end to end to make it simple, right? So that's the first thing that I completed, and I hated it, right? Because it's not original. I mean, the premise was interesting, but I rewrote it then, and I added in doppelgangers, and I added in a demon lord, and I added in, mob, and I added in like all of these other different elements. So the structure of the story was still the same, but the different elements were kind of worked in, and that's what helped make it original, because I plugged in those different pieces in the different places that made sense. Yeah. So you could do that too as a new author.
You could do that too as a new author. Awesome.
Absolutely.
That's a wonderful answer. I like that. And then you seem like a person who likes to laugh, who likes to put a lot of humor into her books. That's kind of hard. How do you do that?
Okay, so everybody's got a different sense of humor. And I know that sometimes I am accidentally funny because I'm constantly putting different elements together that are unexpected. And sometimes that gets you like the unexpected laughter. So that's where I tend to go. And then honestly, I'm kind of a dork, so I really love puns. And so I do have characters that do bad dad jokes and puns inside of there. So depending upon your humor, like, you can catch it that way. So yeah.
Right. I find humor to be like particularly hard to write, especially because it's like you're waiting until publication to see if the joke hits or not, right?
Right.
So that can be a very tricky thing if you don't have kind of a confidence in this is funny, other people will find it funny, and you're just kind of hoping for the best.
And maybe you find it funny, but you don't find it funny, and that's perfectly okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a good tip for writing humor, is working with the humor that you have and that you find funny and kind of like finding your natural rhythm with that. Do you have anything you advise against when it comes to writing humor?
I think it's the don't try too hard. I remember I tried to write something that was funny, and it was this lady with a big hat, and it had like a dog on the top of it, a stuffed dog, and it had all these flowers, and it was, and it was so heavy, she like kept trying to tip over as she's puffing along the lane and getting, looked by her neighbor. And like, I thought it was super funny, but when I look back and had other people read it, they're like, ooh, yeah, you are trying way hard there, Chicky. So you need to like back away. It's not a natural thing. It didn't feel funny. It felt forced. And so don't force it.
Yeah. Force and humor is very, very kind of detrimental to the humor itself. Yeah.
Yes. If you have to explain the joke.
Right. If you have to explain the joke, then it's not very funny. I do like the idea of finding humor in the juxtaposition of like this character in this situation. How you say you naturally kind of find your humor. I do think that would work very well.
And I know some people really like that, they're in super embarrassing positions and they have like all these crazy things happen. They end up with their pants down and whatever else. And like, I'm always like mildly embarrassed by that and not really find it funny because it's like way too close to like home.
Right.
So it's not as funny for me when I read that, but other people love it. And that's great.
Yeah, it's kind of like some people will laugh when they see like the little kid fall down, and some people are like, "Oh my gosh,"
Oh
you
God,
know. So
save
yeah,
them. Yes.
yeah.
Mhm.
All right.
All right. So, like all moms, we're struggling for any extra time at all. How do you find time for writing?
Okay, just as an aside, holy cats, I'll stay-at-home mom with 4 kids and you can be a writer. That is amazing sauce. Like kudos to you, right?
It's really amazing.
That is really amazing. But I think it's prioritization in some ways. And even if it's, 15 minutes that you can spend working on your writing in a particular day, whatever you can do to try and carve out a little bit of time. And then there's also this little bit of like, I don't know about you guys, but some activities take a different amount of brain capacity and a different
Mhm.
amount of time. And so if I'm trying to come up with like this brand new scene and kind of do it all together, like I need more time and I need like less kids yelling in the background. But if I'm doing something like, I'm tweaking the beginning of a scene or I'm going through and doing some like quick edits or something like that, like I can handle that if I'm like, if the kids are screaming in the background kind of
Right,
thing.
right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so it's finding those little slots of time. And then honestly, I deprioritized a lot. Like I used to do art and make jewelry and do different things like that. And I decided that this was my thing. I
Mhm.
was going to be a writer. So all that stuff could wait until, I didn't have a day job. And then,
Mhm.
I'd have more time for writing. So it was stripping away a lot of the other stuff that took up time.
Right. When you're juggling so many balls, eventually you have to like kind of decide which ones to let go and
Mhm,
Yep.
mhm.
There's
which ones
24 hours
to.
in a day.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
have to sleep and eat and spend time with your family, and so you get this little bit of time, and it's like, "Well, what are you gonna do with it?"
You use it.
Right.
You
Yeah.
use it. "Yes, ma'am."
Right. Um, yeah, I love that. Um, when it comes to writing, when you do have the time, what is your favorite part that you really enjoy about writing?
I love all the initial okay, so I like 2 things. I like the beginning of it when you've got that idea and you're all starry-eyed and you're all,
Mhm.
pink sunglasses and you're just like, "Woo, this is the best idea ever." Right? I love that phase and, that's awesome. But the thing
Mhm.
that I like probably slightly better depending upon, like, what day it is, I love the when it finally comes together at the end and that idea and vision, you finally wrote that end scene and you've got everything that flows through and all the little threads connect up and you're looking at this and you're like, holy cats, it's done.
Right. Oh, there's nothing better than the feeling of finishing a novel for sure.
Yeah.
And it's a huge accomplishment because I think we were talking about it on another show, but I think it's only like 6% of people who actually want to write a novel finish.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
It's a
amazing when
lot
you
of hard
do.
work. And
It
there's so much
is.
like self-esteem stuff too. Like it's
Mm.
Oh, yes.
yes.
I'm just laughing because like there's like that starry-eyed beginning and the completion. Those are the two best parts. It's really too bad about that
That whole
sloppy
middle
finishing
thing.
part.
That bit in
Yeah.
the middle, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The
Right.
uphill
Oh my
battle in the
god.
snow both ways.
Mhm.
And the sagging middle, yeah,
A lot of
yeah.
people don't make it. They don't
Right.
finish.
Or they go to that next starry-eyed idea and they go to the next starry-eyed idea
Right.
and they
Mhm.
don't
Right.
dig in and make themselves finish it, even if it
Yeah,
sucks.
that is one thing I recommend for people who are new to writing is to practice finishing. If that means doing short stories, if that means
Mhm.
doing drabbles, like whatever that looks like to you,
Yep,
practice finishing because you learn so much from the process of going through and
Mhm.
finishing a story, even if you're
absolutely.
never going to publish it.
Yep, absolutely. And there's value in that, right? So even if you're never gonna publish it and
Absolutely,
no one's
yeah.
gonna see it, that has amazing value. You can say, "I finished this."
I know. I dislike when people view any kind of words as like unusable or wasted because it's like that there's that I know it's kind of a flawed the way people interpret it, but that idea that you get 10,000 hours of anything in before you're really good at it.
Mhm.
It's you if you're practicing bad habits, like that's not necessarily going to come true for you,
Right.
but you learn so much from the process of doing something that like never is anything a wasted word. If you wrote it and
Right.
even if it's crap, like it
Yep.
still is very
It gives you
valuable.
something to edit. It gives you something to
Mhm.
look at. It gives you
Yes.
something to go, "Yeah, no, I don't
Right.
wanna do that." Okay.
Right. Sometimes it's like relationships. We learn as much from what we don't want to do or don't want to be in a relationship with this person. We learn as much from that as we do from the ones we want to be with.
That you want to keep.
Sometimes you have to write it the wrong way for you to stop and go, this is wrong.
This is
now
wrong.
I see
I don't know why necessarily, but I'm going to try again.
Yes.
Right. Oh my gosh. And I've done that too, where I started writing and I'm slogging through and it's crap and I just start a blank page and start over. And then it's just like, I figured out what I want to say. So then now I can get out the words that are actually going to make sense and be in the final draft. Yeah.
And I have to trick myself sometimes. Like I get so attached to the words, even though they suck, that I'll actually like make a copy of it so that, it's pristine over here. And then I can tear it apart and it's okay. Like, even though I never look back at those words, but I can tear it apart.
I do that too. I have a document that's just discards. So they're not deleted. They're still there.
They're still there.
I can look at them later, recycle them maybe.
Right.
But scenes. Move on and not be so sad.
Yeah, I have a graveyard and a leftovers. So like the leftovers are like, this could maybe work in a different story, or I like this phrasing, or I like the scene.
Yeah.
It's not going to work in this story, so I can use it for something else maybe. And then the graveyard is just like, this is where the words go to die, but I didn't delete it, so I don't have that panic.
I don't have the panic and guilt. Yep.
Yeah.
What if I remember that scene and love it and want it?
Right. It's still somewhere. It's still in the ether, but not in the story where it doesn't belong.
All right. So what is your least favorite part of writing?
Oh, I had major troubles with editing in the beginning. It was like, oh God, do I have to edit? Like, right. But over time, I mean, I see the value of it. I do it. I've come up with a practice that works for me that, like, I know I have to, at a certain point when I write, I hit that like 75% mark and then I'm like stuck. And then I change my premise a little bit and go back from the beginning and then read all the way through again, doing kind of like a different level of edits. And for whatever reason, that makes it less painful. And it makes me sort of like excited to get back into the story instead of being like, oh God, editing.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. And then have you ever been given any kind of writing advice that you really liked?
I have two pieces of writing advice that I really, so the first one is the Not My Cookie. Have you guys heard of this one?
We have not.
Okay, so the gist is like, so I'm a baker and I bake a perfect chocolate chip cookie and it's fresh from the oven and it's got the perfect chips and the perfect temperature and it's, the perfect golden brown and it's just scrumptious. And if I give that cookie to someone who hates chocolate chip cookies, they're going to hate it, right? There's nothing I can do to that chocolate chip cookie that will make them like it. And so writing is the same way. If I write romances, which I don't, but if I did, and I try to give my romance to someone who hates romances, they're never going to like it. And so it's not their cookie. There's no inherent bad in either position of it. It's just not something they like, and move on. And especially with new authors where you're seeking feedback from anybody who will give you any feedback. Right. Figuring out that, oh, that's not their cookie. They're not the person I should be asking for what to do next. Right. Because it's just, they're going to turn it into something different, a sugar cookie or whatever.
Oh, yes.
Right.
And then the second thing that I thought was really good advice is sort of this whole, like, there is no one way. Right. If anybody tells you this is the one way to write a story, they're full of it. That's the way that worked for them. Right. And so you have to kind of go through and try different things and find what works for you. And your process is your process and it's good. Right. As long as it gets you through a book, who cares? Right. Do whatever.
Right.
I have friends who do puppet shows with their things, and that's how they get through different scenes to be able to plan it out. And I'm like, I would never do that, but that is awesome.
Helps you visualize for sure.
Yeah.
I think that we do this a lot. We do this with food. We do this with everything. Like we lump things into good or bad. But like I've been really trying to reframe my whole way of thinking into, is it helpful or not helpful? Right.
That's smart.
Because it's not good or bad. Or if it is, to who, right? It's only to me, right? So then it's just like, is this helpful to me or is this not helpful to me, and why? And then I can like move on to what's helpful and use that rather than trying to be like, oh, this is the right way and the wrong way, because that's not
Right.
really helpful
It
to
doesn't
anyone else.
helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then when you can't do that for whatever reason, because your brain doesn't like doing
Mhm.
10-page, summaries of whatever, it doesn't stop you from still finding your story and getting it
Right.
out there.
Right. Yeah. A lot of people have just kind of like the absolute black and white thinking where it's just like,
If you
this
don't
has to be the
outline, you
right
can't get
way,
the
or if you
story.
don't do it this way, or even for
Right.
themselves, they criticize themselves by saying like, well, I'm not doing it the right way though, even though it's getting done. And
Right.
then they lose that joy in writing and creating.
Right.
Mhm.
And you need that joy.
I
Right.
love your metaphor of like it's not their cookie.
Mhm.
And I want to add to that about being careful who you're getting advice from. You know,
Yes.
Right.
if you're giving your story to someone and they are not loving it or they're giving you a lot of advice, sometimes you have to step back and think, okay, wait, but what do you know about writing or writing in my genre? Or
Right.
what's your background? You know, because I have a number of friends who really don't enjoy fantasy, and fantasy is what I'd write. You know,
Mhm.
or when I was trying to
Mhm.
write my blurb and people were reading it, they're like, no, this needs more action. I'm like, well, but like it
Does it?
needs to match the tone
Just
of
it
my
has to
book.
match the book as well. Yeah.
Yes, it needs to match
Right.
the tone of my book. I need to not have the blurb be completely different from what's inside the book.
Right.
Yeah.
So be very careful who you're taking advice from. You want to find out people who write in your genre
Yep.
or something similar. You have a similarity, or you want to be more like them. Like
Yeah.
so.
Right. And that's actually one of the big reasons why we started this podcast, is because we wanted to talk about everyone's different writing process and their journey and how it's different, because we really believe that like as many different writers that exist in the world, there are that many different writing processes.
Yep.
And so you can always learn from hearing about other people's writing processes, but it's not like one is better than the other. It's just, because I always believe that like my writing process has evolved and changed with each book, with each story
Yep.
that I do. And so I love hearing other people's process because it might give me an idea of something new to try. But I also am not going to be like, this is, because I actually
This is the
responded to it.
way.
I responded to a TikTok today of a guy was like saying like controversial take, but plotting is better than pantsing, and saying why he thought that. But it's a conversation starting point, right? He wanted to
Right.
start a conversation about it and get engagement and all that. But it's just like, yeah, you can't just say like plotting's better than pantsing, because even if you do believe that's true and you were a pantser before, like that's still only your experience.
Right.
Do you both make it to the end and have a
Yeah.
great
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I've got outlines for 5 different books, and I will never write those books. They will never happen.
Because
I
you
just
feel like you already wrote them because
I
you
wrote
plotted
them.
them.
I know what happened. So like, what am I going to do with this?
Right.
Yeah.
My sister is very similar in that way, where she's just like, if I know it's going to happen, then I feel like it's already done and I don't have the drive to write it.
But I like being in a community that learns from each other and shares and helps each other up. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
that's
Do
the
you
goal
know
of
the latest thing that I figured out? This is like so weird. I never thought about, but like I've figured out that I am a verbal plotter. I've never heard this before. Have
Oh,
you heard
yeah.
this?
I've
That
heard of
like
verbal processing.
Yeah, and so I have to actually say the stuff out loud to someone, and even if they're just looking at me like I'm crazy, like, that process of vocalizing it stirs
Helps you
something in my
figure it
pea
out.
brain and makes me
Mhm.
figure it out, yeah, whereas I try to write it
Yeah.
out loud,
Yeah.
or draw a diagram, it doesn't work, but when I say it out loud,
Right.
boom, all of a sudden it's like, "Oh, oh, oh."
The synapses start firing, and then you make
Yeah,
those connections.
and make those connections, yeah.
Mhm.
I
Julia
love
is
sound
often
bites.
my victim where I'm just talking and talking and talking about my story. And sometimes she says one thing and I'm like, "Oh, I've got it," just because I said it out loud and it helps me
Right.
Nice.
connect
Yes.
to
Yes.
the next part.
Yeah. Verbal processing is definitely a thing. Um, so we we didn't talk about this in your full bio because we didn't read your full bio to introduce you, but you do talk about some different things that inspire your writing. So where do you get your inspiration and your influences from your writing?
So I loved Anne McCaffrey and Alan Dean Foster growing up. I think I'm dating myself. And I just I loved their stories and how it was like the Crystal Tears. I don't know if you guys have ever read that, but it was in an alien point of view. And I'd never read anything that was from an alien point of view where like I
Mm,
cared about what happened to him. Like I wanted
right.
him to succeed in this alien society. And it was so eye-opening that it didn't have to be just the person next door that you were thinking about or writing about, that it could, there was a
Right.
bigger, broader world out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a similar experience with the first fantasy book I read, and I was just like, there can be dragons, and there
Yeah.
can be other, you know what I mean? It's just like my worldview just widens. And also, like, I love that idea of like things that would be seen stereotypically or traditionally in the past as like the bad guy or the antagonist characters. Like reading the Martian Chronicles, you're not like, oh, those dang aliens,
Right.
like they humanize and like get you to really relate to the aliens too. And it's kind of that having that for the first time, seeing like, oh, this is the other person's shoes and they're not all bad, it can be really great for writers too.
Yeah. I
Mm-hmm.
love that. And then I played a lot of D&D growing up. I started
Mm-hmm.
playing Dungeons and Dragons with my dad in the third grade. And I don't know if you guys have seen those books, but there's just amazing arts inside of there and all of these like, different scenes and the creatures and the scenarios. And that's very inspiring. That whole entire thing
Mm-hmm.
is just amazing.
I've played since high school as well. So
Mm-hmm.
it
Yeah.
gives you a lot of practice for putting yourself in the shoes of somebody else who's not you. And what would they do in all these scenarios?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
storytelling,
It's storytelling.
collaborative storytelling.
Yeah.
Yeah, which can be a lot of fun.
Do you ever get writer's block or something that just absolutely stumps you?
I do. I do. I do. I do. Though I kind of call it like maybe it's not even a block because I don't even realize I'm blocked. So what happens is my house is clean, or like
Right,
I've
right. You're
organized a room,
procrastinating.
or right, like, and I don't even realize. And all of a sudden I look up and I'm like, wait a minute, why am I not writing? What's going on? And then I realize that I just wrote something or thought something that goes against, like it doesn't mesh. And there's
Right.
something going on in the story that just is not working, and that's where the verbal processing comes. And I've got friends and editors that I work with to be like, all right, here's what I got going, and then I go blah 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 with what's going on. I
Right.
don't
Until
like it
you
because
figure
of
it out.
this and that. Yes, and then finally, and that'll happen. It's sort of depressing, but probably somewhere between 1 and 4 times in a story where I just kind of like I
Mm,
stop and I'm like, wait a minute, like that didn't quite. And part of it is because I don't know if you guys do this too, that you'll be writing a scene and then all of a sudden something happens that you were totally not expecting. Like
right.
I was writing a book where the character is checking on someone's grandma, and it's set in like a futuristic in the underground sort of society. And the grandma looked at her and was like, oh, like, I know who you are. I know your mom. Well, she was an orphan, and I had no idea there was just going to be this connection. And I went, oh, well, that means I have to change all this over. Okay, what do I do?
Yes.
Right?
All the cascading changes that happen.
Right?
You love the new idea. It's
Yes.
taken, but now you have to go fix it all.
All fix it all, and all those
Yeah.
threads that go through, you got to reconnect
Mhm.
everything and brainstorm about, okay, now how does this all work together?
Yes.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yes.
So how do you find solutions for that? Besides the verbal processing, like how do you
Okay, so the big thing is for me anyway is recognizing, like, I can't go 2 weeks and suddenly like I've read 500 books or whatever, like not that that's happened. Um
Yeah.
right? I have to recognize it as the number one thing. And then like I said, the verbal processing, and then sometimes it's just like taking a step back and going, okay, what was my story about again? Like what was the thing that got me excited about the story?
Mm,
Where was it going? Okay, here's my characters. Oh, I just wrote this scene about, oh, right. Like, and even like trying to
right.
just go through and figure out like, when did it happen? When did that thing happen that you're like, no, this doesn't work? And sometimes it's just even a little bit like some part of my pea brain recognizes that I wrote this happening over here, but over in the first chapter, I wrote something that makes that completely impossible. And so, like,
Yeah.
once I recognized that, I was like, oh, okay, I have to change one of these two things and then I'm fine. Let's go.
Right, right.
Mhm.
That
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. I always have heard that when you get writer's block or you feel like you're experiencing writer's block, it's kind of because your character's doing something they wouldn't do, or you're trying to make something work. You're trying to force something again that is not going to help the story or work in the story. And so
Yeah,
it's like your subconscious is kind of like rioting in the background.
exactly. And your
Yeah.
subconscious, at least in my case, is like, oh, no, stop before you
Right.
get more.
Right. They're trying to save you the trouble of writing 100 pages on the wrong track. Yeah.
Right.
All right. So what has been your biggest writing victory so far?
Honestly, it was finishing that first book, and I told you guys a little bit about it, because I had been working on a different book that was, it was Book of Secrets in the Merge series, and I'd been working on that book for like, I don't know, 5 years or some crazy
Mhm.
thing, and had gone through, and I was so frustrated because I couldn't get to the end, and I recognized you have to get to the end. I could do it in short stories, but this was the biggest thing I'd written, and
Right.
so creating that separate story and going through that whole process of just doing a straight old three act structure, getting it done, right? So once I had that done and then added in the fantasy elements, I was like, yes, it's
Mhm.
done.
Right. That is such a good feeling, like we were talking about earlier.
Yep.
And I know, like I can relate because like I put magic in everything, even if it's like a horror story. Sometimes there's just magic in it because that's what I love writing, and so it's like I can relate to like struggling to get just the suspense out, and then once you add in the magical elements, being like, now it makes all sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Holding your book for the first time is just such a good feeling.
That's
It
true.
really is. Yeah.
It really is.
And just being like, I made this.
I made this. Yes.
Yeah. That otter meme. I made this, and she's so proud. That's definitely a great feeling.
All right. Do you have a favorite book or author?
I was thinking about that, and a bunch of the old school stuff came to mind, and I like all sorts of different things, and I have a lot of like go to auto-buy authors that I do read. This is going to sound really. I read mostly romance, as funny as that sounds, because I want the happy ending in my life, and it makes me feel
Right.
happy. And so there's a lot of just fabulous romance authors out there, and I'm totally blanking their names because I'm always like they just come into my it's autobuy, so it just comes into my Kindle and I see it. I'm like, "Whoa, look, it's here!"
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, so you love the romance genre because you love like the happy ending,
The happy
that
endings.
nice, neat
They're nice.
resolution
I
at the
know I'm
end.
getting a
Yeah.
happy ending. I know they get together. The romantic in me is satisfied that whatever trope is in there, that
Right.
it's made it to the end. Yep.
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
relate to that. I do a lot of rereading because I'm like, sometimes my anxiety can't handle the new
Yep.
dramatic book. You know what I mean? Like some
Yep.
dramas on TV, I'm just like, I'm not watching that.
I'm
That is
not
too dramatic. Yeah.
exactly. I'm going to go back to that scene that I love with these two characters when they, do
Right,
whatever here.
right,
Yep.
right.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I don't write that. And it's so funny because I wanted to write that, but I couldn't do it. The beats were just, all of a sudden there was a zombie invasion or magic coming in and, the world's about to
Right.
end. And the romance was always like a secondary thing. There's lots of romance in mine, like
Right.
as a secondary, but it was never the primary because I don't hit the right beats.
Yeah, I think that I had a show previously before this one, and I would love to ask people if they read the same things that they wrote, and so often it was not the case.
It's not.
They would read a completely different genre than what they write. Not that they wouldn't read in their genre as well, but they would just like the genre they really loved to read was very different than what they write, and I find that so fascinating.
Yeah.
Yes. There's romance in my books as well, but I wouldn't really classify them as a romance at
Right.
all. I just feel like falling in love or having things happen is just sort of part of life that
Right.
is the adventure,
Yeah.
but it isn't the sole focus.
It isn't the sole focus. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
All right. And then my favorite question, at least, is what is writing advice that you absolutely hate?
Oh, there can be only one way to finish your book. That was my
Right.
words. I don't know how many times, especially in the beginning, someone would say, well, if you don't plot, then you can't get your book done. And this is
Right.
on you. Right. And I pick on plotting just because that I tried it and it didn't work for me. So that was probably the worst piece of advice that I've ever gotten is there is only one way.
Yeah, we find people a lot of times don't like absolute period in writing advice because of the never use an adverb, always show and tell, things like that. They really
Right.
pick up on that, like, that's never the case. There's always
Yeah.
exceptions to the rules, and there's
Right.
always, times where you
That's-
don't want to follow that.
It doesn't mean their advice is bad necessarily, but again, it's not absolutes. Never.
Yeah.
Right. And it might not
Yeah.
work for you, or it might not work for this book, or it might not work for you
Right.
now, or right? Like,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we
It was
went through
really
our
wonderful
questions
getting to know
very
you.
quickly. Yeah, but it was wonderful having you on.
Yeah, thank you.
Where can we find you online for everyone listening at home? Where can they find you online, learn more about you, and learn more about your book?
I am mostly a wide author, so any bookstore should have me, online bookstore. And I'm also at claudiablood.com, or you can also look at my link tree. Ooh, right here. Has all of the other links for social media.
Wonderful.
That makes it easy.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about like one of your series. Like,
Yep. So I just released on the 15th of May in 2023 the third book in it's like a prequel series, which sounds really weird, but it's what happened. And it was called Lyra, and I love Lyra. The next one's supposed to come out in July 15th, which is going to be The Duchess. And then it all comes together. The series is called Renegades Rising. And it is a group of women, mostly women, who come together and basically save the world. Futuristic, it's sci-fi, sci-fantasy. That's where I'll put it.
okay.
Yep. And so the prequels that are out there are all about sort of gathering the team. So it goes through where they came from, and they all end up in jail at the end of women's jail at the end of their books. And the
Right.
final book starts at jail, and then you defeat the bad guy. Which of course there's an evil company and cyborgs and I don't know, all sorts of crazy things.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
It does sound like a lot of fun, and I love the they get put in jail and that kind of galvanizes them together to work to fight against the greater foe.
Now,
Yep.
I was looking at the dates of your publications. Would you consider yourself a rapid release author?
I would. In this case, those are novellas, so they were a smaller
Okay.
sort of thing.
Right.
The previous, yes, I tried to, and then COVID happened,
Right.
so that kind of messed everybody up. I shoot for trying to do at least one book a year, but sometimes, like in this, inspired and just went for it. Lyra was
Yeah.
actually written over a writer's weekend or a writer's retreat over a week, and just was
Oh.
so into the story. I was just like,
Yes.
That sounds fantastic.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was a lot of fun.
Wonderful. Well, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show. We've really enjoyed it. And thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone listening along at home. Be sure to check out our next episode, which comes out on Friday. And remember, there's more than one way up the mountain. And if you're interested in being on our show as a guest, you can find us on social media at The Tell Not Show or email us at thetellnotshow@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed the show, consider subscribing and liking. We appreciate all the support. Julia J.K. Allen is an author, editor, and coach and can be found at hijinksrudder.com.
Kirsha Fox is an author, avid reader, gamer, and mother to four, and you can find her at kirshafox.com. Thanks and see you next time.